Hello, everybody. I want to know if you can hear me, if everything is okay with the sound. So can you please let me know, raise your hand, or write me a message? Yes, I can see one raise hand. Any more? Yes. Very good. So welcome again, and I hope you have a really nice day. I know that there are a lot of people coming today from different countries, and finally spring came to Denmark too. And I would like to get started with Impact Revit webinar. Basically, this webinar is kind of another part of the previous webinar because we got a lot of feedback from the previous webinar regarding getting started with Impact Revit. And in this webinar, we will be answering most of your questions and also showing some more tips and tricks how to use Impact Revit and improve your workflow quality and make it easier to you to work with Impact Revit. It's not going to be all about Impact Revit only. It's going to be about Revit functions, just to get you into the Revit and some smart functions and what we're working on with Impact. So today's agenda is basically, I will tell you some more what is Impact Revit, what we have produced with the TrueSoft software Impact, where you have an Impact tab, and this is basically the model we have made in a previous webinar. And today also we will be looking at the tips and tricks list I have made according to your questions. And afterwards you will be able to ask any questions, or if you have some more questions, you want some personal presentation or something like this, feel free to write us an email or give us a call so we can make it more detailed. And I'm your guidance today. My name is Justina, as most of you already know, and let's get started with Impact. Why Impact Revit is so cool program is because all the functions are user-friendly. It's very easy to use the functions because they are all placed in one place under the Impact tab. For example, you have Elements tab where you create all the components. Then you can modify them by using Insert Lift, modifiers, connections, insert rebars, and so on. Impact Revit is synchronized with a database under this tab. And then we have some extra smart tools where we can just move things around and change element marks, or, for example, insert text to see what's going on with our project. We have also instant improvements. Right now we have developed hollow cores and columns and beams. They are fully working and mostly no mistakes. Also, we are working right now on the walls module, so it's coming in the future. And we provide the client with adjustable standards where you can just adjust them to your company standards. For example, you want to use different casting material schedules or some element list or some sections, special sections you use for your standard. So it's always possible to change them and apply them for the template. So all the production drawings are looking the same according to your company standards. This one here is very basic TrueSoft template we have right now, but you can add a lot of more things to this. And this is the list we will be working on today of the tips and tricks. There are quite many of them, and I will be looking more detailed at the functions we have, how we can actually work with them, and what it gives to us as a users. So if we go to Revit, as I told you, this is the model we made from the last webinar. This is mainly columns and beams, which you create by using Elements tab in here. We have beams, columns, other elements that can be linked with a database. Then we have components. And of course, if your company standard has, for example, different lifts or some casting materials, it's not a problem. You can always make a new family in Revit and also link it to the Impact. So it can be in your template and applied to all your elements that you use in the company. So to get started, let's look at the hollow core settings. Right now, I don't have any hollow cores in my model, but if I go to level 2, because I have 3 levels in here, as you can see, this is level 0. Then in the middle for the hollow cores, I have made level 2. And the bottom one, the top one is level 3. If I jump to the level 2, I have some model lines ready to draw hollow cores. To do so, I go for the Elements tab and choose Hollow Cores. Under the Hollow Cores window, I get main options. So first I have to go for the hollow core type I want to use. Let's say we use 185 millimeters height hollow core, which is HC19. And then the boundary, I have several options to pick a floor, pick model lines, or draw some rectangular. But I'm gonna pick model lines as I already have them made. So I just pick the edges and simply say finish. Now you can see some of the edges, how my hollow cores will look like, but I want to change the placement, origin placement to the top, because I want to level out level 2 with the top edge. And of course I can select different direction if I want them vertical or horizontal, so it's very easy, you just pick one line. And the partial slabs, I can change the position of the partial slab, as you can see. Let's place it here somewhere. And the strand patterns, according to your loads and design requirements, you can choose from different strand patterns. You can actually change them in hollow core settings. And then I can apply some end caps. I will show you later how to create new end caps. And this is very basic one. So I just say, okay, everything seems to be fine. And let's see what I get. If I go to 3D, yes, everything seems okay. If I go to the elevation, I will tell you more why I have chosen the origin as the top, because you see this is level 2 and I want to have it in one line with the top origin, so the insertion point is the top one. If I go to 3D, let's draw another side, like another part of the hollow cores on the other side, by using a bit different method. So let's go to Impact Hollow Core and say draw some shape. So I will be following the model lines, but drawing with impact function. Again, placement top, and so on. All the settings seem to be the same. I say OK. So this was even faster way to draw hollow cores, and they mostly look the same, except some settings like partial, slab, and so on. But if I want to make some more changes in this hollow core, I have to double click on it and then I open it in Family Editor. In Family Editor, if I go under the Impact tab, I have hollow core settings. Those are the settings that hollow core component family itself includes. So for example, I have general about the shape, height, the weight, and the tolerance that I can of course change. Then I have geometry, of course, where they are placed, and some cutting, the geometry of cutting. But if I would like for the geometry create new end cap, I go for the front, and I will draw some very rough shape of the end cap by using model line. So I start from here, let's say somewhere here. And this will look like this. Then I basically go again to the hollow core setting. And you see I have a list of end caps already predefined in our standard. But if you want to make a new end cap, you just click on New. Give it a name, for example, Test End Cap. And geometry, I have to pick the geometry I just made. So choose, pick those model lines and say Finish. Now Revit asks me for origin point. This is going to be the very right point. So this is the insertion point. I don't want to have any core filling at this end cap, so I say none to the core filling, and yes, and then I just save it and go for this test end cap. Talking about strands, we have all the strands predefined in here. For example, the top ones are here, bottom and outer bottom. So you can make diameter or quality strands you want to have in your project. But those strands are basically used for strand groups. So if I have a strand group of 33, for example, I have to make a checklist of the strands I want to use for this group. So for example, group 33 includes those strands that are visible in this dynamic view. Recesses, they can be found under the connection tab, and if you just insert a recess, it's going to look like this. But of course, the way it looks, it can be changed. You can change the dimensions and the core numbers you want to have recess in. Recess edge also is under the connection tab, and you can change the dimensions for recess edge. Let's look more deeper for hangars detail. And if we say new hangar detail, we're going to give it a name, new name. You can predefine some dimensions for hangar detail. And the core filling is basically that this cast material will be inserted as a hanger, which will we add as a cast material, which will be under casting materials FBL anchor. Of course, it can be different casting material you use for your standard, but this basically means that this casting material will be casted in a core filling, and the size will be 600 millimeters, and we will have 2 cores filled. So it seems to be okay. I have a new hangar detail in here, and then I click OK. What I do now is basically I load new settings into the project, overwrite existing version, and now you can see that I don't have any changes yet, but if I go for this hollow core, I just select it, go for the impact, edit hollow core, and if I want to go for the end cap, I can choose test end cap. So now you can see that it appears as a new end cap we have created. If we have it inserted, you can see the hollow core is changed. Now we have a new end cap looking like we have made it by the profile. Also, let's try to insert the hangar detail. Let's say that we want to have an opening for this hollow core, and then we say insert hangar. Select the slab to support. Let's say this one. We say finish, and now select supporting slabs. It's going to be the slabs next to it, and let's draw the opening by using this hangar we have just configured. So now you see we have 2 new hollow cores out of 1 hollow core. We have a hangar detail inserted. And if I click at on this element, you can see that as we have predefined, we have core filling where we have hangar detail. So the width is 600 millimeters, and we have 2 cores filled. Of course, now I have to change the end cap for those 2 hollow cores because they are new hollow cores. I have to adjust. So if I say edit hollow core, I can just go for the end caps and say test, test, and this is changed. As we have made some recesses and recess edge, you can also add recess and recess edge that will come from the settings we have just made. But we can also make some core filling for other slabs. So let's say we want to have a core filling in somewhere here, as we have this line made. So that means we will have cores filled in 3, 4, and 5th cores. Dimensions come from the standards we have in geometry from the settings. And then I say OK. If I click on this element, you can see that the cores are filled. So in this way, you can actually see how easy it is to define all the settings. They are basically more or less the same as we normally use in AutoCAD. But I think this is a lot easier and faster to use it in Revit once you have them predefined according to your company standards. Let's try to save those hollow cores for both sides. If I say update model, Revit will find out that I have not saved those elements yet. So I have to select those elements to be saved and click on update, and they will get a new element mark. So now you see the element marks are appearing. I have hollow core 1, 2. Revit basically starts from number 1 and goes further on depending on how many elements we have. But another trick I want to show you is basically like we have in AutoCAD program. If we have hollow cores for the first floor, we normally call them hollow core 100. If we have hollow cores for the second floor, we call them hollow core 200 and so on. It is also possible to do that in Impact Revit, but as I said, the Revit itself finds the hollow cores from 1 to the next ones. But if I want, for example, let's insert the text. So now you see this is hollow core 1, 2, and so on, 3, 4. But if I want those hollow cores being changed, I say remark element, and now I have here hollow core 5 and 6 element marks. I want them to be hollow core 200, for example. So that means that this part will start from 200, and I can of course change this part in here by naming it from hollow core 100. So you can actually predefine your own way of numbering system by using remark elements function. And this is very easy if you have several floors and you want to actually know for which floor it belongs to when you look at the model viewer or when you make production drawings. So this is kind of simpler system you can make in Impact Revit. So we say check for the hollow core settings. We have looked at the settings very detailedly, and let's look at the reinforcement configuration that we can work. If I go to 3D, let's go for Rebar. We have this special 3D preview where you can see all the rebars, the elements, they are transparent, and you can see what's going on inside, for example, like strands and reinforcement, so on. If I click on this element, you can see that this is RC rebar. We have kind of system that if it says rebar, it has predefined settings for reinforcement. That means that if I go to impact and I say insert rebar for this element, I have predefined settings for reinforcement. And all it takes is just one button, OK, and I have reinforcement inserted. But what if I have different reinforcement configuration or different type of element? I can make a new configuration just by simply creating a new column. I will take a very basic one, square one, and draw it up to level 3, for example. So that means it doesn't have any reinforcement configuration. And if I click on Insert Rebar, Revit actually says that I don't have rebar configured and I have to make it. To do so, we have to, I would suggest to open several windows because then it's easier to configure all the reinforcement. To do so, I will close the windows behind by clicking on this and make it smaller, 3D preview, and I will open a plan view. because we normally work on a plan, but it is easier to see what is going on in 3D. I will make this one shaded. Okay, so if I click on element, I have this rebar settings. But before I do so, I have to go to the structure and just make sure that I have rebar cover settings. So those are cover settings that we can set for our element, and you can add your own cover settings according to your company. And if I click on the element and go to the properties, I have rebar cover for the top one. So let's make it 40, for example, bottom 25, and so on, just random numbers. And if I click on the element, I click rebar, I have a list of rebars I can use already for my kind of element, but I can also choose to sketch my own rebar stirrup. So I choose to go for the far cover. That means it will start from the bottom part in the 3D and parallel to work plane. So that means I'm working on the top. Then let's sketch a stirrup. You can see the cover already comes in here. I just simply draw some stirrup shape and say OK. You see it already comes here in a place. Let's go back a bit because this got in the middle. If I click rebar, far cover reference, somehow Revit decides to draw it in the middle. I don't know why actually, but let's continue and we will look at it later. If I click on rebar and go to edit type, the bending is it has a quite huge radius, and I want to change it to 50, for example, and say OK. I can add hooks if I want to. The hooks, you can find them in the properties. Hook at the end, for example, you can go for 108. You have a lot of settings that you can change in here, but in this time I will keep it as simple as possible. So if I click on rebar, I want to have a maximum spacing with a distance of 150. I will move to the bottom. So we basically have some stirrups predefined in our element. If I go for like rebars, I can draw some rebars for the moment curve and so on. But let's keep it simple, and now I just select the element and I say rebar configuration. Choose the element, and I have rebar 1, which is newly created shape, and I have all the dimensions already in my settings, and I later on can change the thickness of the steel and the quality. But for now I say OK, and I have to save it in my impact element folders system. So if I go for the Revit elements, I have to save it in the columns section and name it with a new name, test configuration. Okay, and if I open 3D, I will draw a new column which will be with already predefined settings, reinforcement settings. So I have to go for the recently created RS test configuration. Let's go for the size 40 by 40 and add it next to it. Let's go also up to level 3. And now if I go for the impact and say insert rebar, I have this setting I just made. I can choose the thickness of the steel. I have the quantity and spacing. It all seems to be right. Let's try to insert it. And now you can see that basically I have exactly the same settings as I have made it in my previous column. And if you create many more with different sizes and different width of the column, it's going to be with exactly the same predefined settings as we have just made. Yes, and that was it for the reinforcement configuration. Let's say it's a check mark. But another thing we can do with the reinforcement, I got a question previously, is that basically we can see how Revit is capable of being linked with other TrueSub programs. So let's try to open Report tool. And the reinforcement that we have inserted in our elements, let's try to have a report out of this. If I go for reinforcement bending schedule picture, update template, and I can choose which product I want to use. For example, I have this column in here, or I can go for all the elements. So there's a filter system that I can sort elements out, but let's try to see what we get for reinforcement schedule. So you can see all the reinforcements we have in our project. This is stirrup list. We have this shape A and N. Of course, if we add more, we will get some more. We can make a table of elements too, and a lot of other things. Update, print. So here we get the list of elements, and you can see that I have actually 3 levels created in this Revit, and you can see the elements on which level they belong. So for example, in level 3, I have 3 pre-stressed beams with the link, with the mark name B1. So this is very smart tool, and it's really good that Revit can actually be sent to the AutoCAD, report tool, model viewer, and they all have the same information which comes from the database. So it's very important to have all the links with the database and make the right synchronization with update model with the database, so that also model viewer can get the latest updates from database. So report tool is okay. Let's look at the faces we can create in Revit. So it is a lot easier to work with the faces. You can, for example, have faces like new or existing face if you make renovation, or if you want to structure your work, you can say that there is a face, completed work, and the planned work or design, just like we have in Project Manager. But we can do the same actually in Impact Revit. So if we go for View, Manage. Yeah, it's Manage, Faces. First, I have to create faces in Revit, and then, as I said, it's very important to make the right links with Impact Revit. That means with the database. So I start by creating new faces in Revit, and let's call this new face. And the phase 2 will, now let's say this is existing face, and this is a new face. Of course, you can create your own faces depending on what you want to sort things like. And then let's say OK. So we have 2 faces in Revit. But if I go for the impact and see Manage Faces, there is one face that is not linked with the impact. So I just simply say link, and that means that Revit name existing face has impact name 1. This can be also found in the model viewer with the same impact name. So those faces are being saved into the database, and they can be sorted in other programs. So we have those faces. Let's try to create a new 3D preview, which we will call New Construction. So we say that in here, we want to see the new face. And if I scroll down, there is already predefined face, existing face, but let's say that this is supposed to be a new face. All elements are grayed out now. You can't see like any edges or something. But if I select some of the elements and go to impact and say edit face, and I want this to be a new face, I click OK, and now you can see those are visible elements. That means those elements are no more existing face, but they are new face. And by this, you can sort your elements by in a 3D new construction, or create some more faces and just have as many previews as you want, because it makes our work much easier. So this is very smart function that we normally use a lot, especially with renovation, or if you want to structure your work and see where are you with your faces. So this is check mark also. I got another question regarding coloring elements and objects. In some of my projects, I found it quite useful to use a Revit function, EOD, Overwrite Graphics. So for example, if I have 3D rebar, it's especially with the companies who work a lot with reinforcement and just they want to check the clash or something to have some revisions. I first want to have 3D view with solid rebar view. So I say check none, and I only want to have structural rebar. So this is marked. And if I go to 3D properties and say edit view visibility and 3D rebar, this is the 3D view I have right now. I want to see it as solid. So now if I zoom in, I can see 3D reinforcement, like solid reinforcement with the right thickness that we have set in the settings. And you can check clash detection and many other things if there are some conflicts with the reinforcement and cast in materials. But some companies actually, if they say, let's say they have some kind of revision window, 3D window, or they create some kind of sheet with the legend with what color means what. They can, for example, say, let's take this reinforcement group, for example, and they want to color it out just for the future, so they have revision on here, or they have to check something, or mark out different reinforcement groups. So I just say that the pattern is solid and apply. So now you can see it gets a color, and it can be also added to the production sheets, so to mark out some of the parts. And this function is done very easily. You just take the element or any other object and you type in the shortcut EOD. And then you have this view graphics window where you say surface patterns. You choose any color you want. And then you click on solid fill. Apply, and it's OK. Of course, this function can be not manually added, but not with using EOD, but you can make your labels and criteria for each element. So for example, if the element is larger than, for example, 3 meters, it will get automatically colored as some kind of clash, or that element is too large. So you can play around and make a lot of functions in Revit that will help you a lot with your production and precast design. But this was the question I have received, and they said that they use those reinforcement groups and they want them to be like colored out to kind of sort out of the general 3D view. And let's look at ready for production trick. I was thinking, since I got this question about coloring out, we have another smart function which is ready for production. So let's say we have production drawings for some of the elements we want to like get rid of, not to look at them anymore. And the the way we make those 3D previews is basically by making filters with the criteria we have in Impact. So now we will make new 3D preview where we will be able to see which elements are ready for production. So we duplicate view with detailing, and we call it ready for production. This is kind of management tool that you can use in your everyday work with Revit. And what I do now is basically I have to go to the view and create a new filter in Revit, which will be called, let's create a new one, ready for production. As we have already this label in a shared parameter set ready for production, we have to choose the category for which we want to use this shared parameter. It is going to be structural framing. That means columns and beams. And it has to be filtered by the criteria is going to be ready for production. Ready for production is kind of formula, label formula, which equals to yes. It is ready for production, yes. Then we say apply, okay. And we have got this filter in Revit, inside Revit. But if we click on ready for production 3D preview window, and if we go to visibility graphics, we have list of elements we can see on this preview. Of course, you can mark out casting materials, whatever you want, so it does not disturb you in different 3D views. We have categories, imported categories, and here we come to the filters. We can add the filter we just made with this formula, ready for production. So I say include this filter, ready for production. And the same way we did this EOD, Overwrite Graphics, we do it here, that criteria which meets yes for ready for production, we say it's going to be green with a solid pattern. We say apply, okay. But now we don't have any elements ready for production yet. What we do is go for the impact and say ready for production. So we choose that this, and this element is actually ready for production. It didn't mark out this one. Let's try again. Ready for production. Yes. So now you can see that every time you click on ready for production, if it's already set ready for production, in a 3D preview, you will have it as a green color, or you can just remove them totally, and so on. And another thing we have in Impact Revit is impact planning. This is more or less the same as a model viewer, but you can see everything in one place. So now we have 3 elements set ready for production, and you can see the check mark for those 3 elements. Of course, we can say some more elements are ready for production and add some additional data, which will be linked with the model viewer later on. And let's go to the 3D ready for production. Yes, some more come. And let's update the model. Save unsaved elements. And let's go to the model viewer. So now when I open model viewer, I open the recent project. And I already have this criteria ready for production. And you can see the elements I have already marked. They are marked also in here. If I click on element ID, I can also see them in the list that this is ready for production. So this actually proves that Revit can be easily linked with other TrueSoft programs by sharing same database. And this was the last check mark in my tips and tricks. Do you have any questions? I know that it's a bit hard to figure out the questions right now. I also like getting emails afterwards. Then I can look at them more detailedly and send answers with the videos and things like that. But as you think of the okay, I have some questions. Do you have any examples on TT slab? Not in this impact standard, but I know there is a company actually who produces TT slab with impact Revit. You just have to make a new Revit family. I don't have it right now, I'm sorry, but I can maybe make some presentation afterwards and answer this by email. Because right now I'm using very basic impact standard folder. But this folder can be adjusted to your company standard, and some companies, they create their own elements depending on what they produce in the company. Okay, as you think of more questions, I will show you some like easy tips and tricks. Another functions that we have in Impact is basically changed cast orientation. If I click change cast orientation and choose, for example, the surface opposite way I want to have, so it basically changes the casting material position. So I don't need to use this flip, rotate, and mirror the element. All I have to do now is basically update the model, and it will update the element mark with the new information regarding casting material. Another thing, if I just copy this element in here, draw our grid or something, just a simple example. And if I say copy rotate, as you can see in the icon, it will copy and rotate the element on the other side. So let's see how it works. If I say copy rotate and I choose the middle axis or some reference line, it basically copies and rotates the element. So instead of using two Revit functions, copy or mirror and rotate, I can only use copy rotate function in Impact. So this is quite useful actually in big projects and when they are symmetrical. Another function that we have is trim extend, as you have seen in the previous webinar. So for example, I don't have to use modifiers like beam end, where I have to set the angle, what angle I would like to cut my beam end, or what kind of angle should be applied for the column top. So I can just simply go to the elevation or section, draw a reference line, and use this trim extend. And it will figure out what kind of angle I want according to the reference line. I got another question. Does the reinforcement also mirror automatically? Yes. I'm not too sure if we try to. I have never tried actually. And if we say grid mirror, okay, let's try to mirror this column by using copy rotate and choosing the axis. Yes, it actually does, because this is also family and it rotates the reinforcement. So it takes the whole assembly and rotates everything as it's included in assembly. But if you don't want to have it rotated, you can just use simple mirror function in Revit. So what it does actually then, it takes the same element. If I go to modify, and then I kind of mirror it. So it mirrors in the axis, in the middle axis. Or I can just simply say copy paste and just paste it the same way it is right now. I hope it answered the question. Do you have the ability to export production data like unit technique from Revit? I'm afraid I am not able to answer this question because I'm not so familiar with unit technique, but I can actually ask some of the colleagues and find out for you. If I just... Yes, I will answer to you this question by email because I have to look at it more precisely. Yes, do you have any more questions? No more questions. So thank you a lot for today. I hope you will have the perfect day today, the rest of the day. I wish you good luck with Impact Revit, and if you just have any questions, feel free to call me or write me an email, and I will be glad to help you. So thank you for today, and bye.